Welcome back to Steele and Mance. We are going to talk about the stabbing at Starbucks here, and we're going to let you know right up front, we are not showing any graphic visuals of what happened on Sunday in downtown Vancouver, the tragedy that struck this 37-year-old father.
Oh, and I think people right across the province have heard about it or seen some of the images. What happened was there was a young dad. His name is Paul Schmidt, 37, went to pick up his wife. He was with his 3.5-year-old daughter. They went to the Starbucks. The wife and the daughter went. He was waiting outside with the daughter in a stroller. And apparently, we don't know for sure, there was someone who was vaping nearby, and he said, hey, don't do that because my child's in a stroller. And that led to a bizarre fight where the suspect stabbed this young father essentially to death. I mean, he did die in the hospital, but there were several people around. And the suspect he didn't try to escape. He didn't try to run away. He just stood there at the Starbucks, at the window, looking at his cell phone, and they arrested him and charged him with second-degree murder. But Jody, here's the thing. A lot of people were there. There were people on the patio. There were people filming it.
Did you wonder to yourself, what would you do? Did you wonder while watching this, like, what are they doing? Did you, as a longtime news person, a journalist, did you look at it and say, why are they standing around? Or were you more
I wondered more about how I would handle it.
Yeah.
I want you to hear from this local blogger who made an interesting comment about the lack of action.
So Canada's pretty messed up. People record crime happening. People record a stabbing happening in broad daylight in Vancouver. And there's a gentleman that is sitting next to him on the patio of a Starbucks who continues to drink his beverage while a man bleeds out and blood goes everywhere. This is messed up.
There's no question that it's messed up, but it's also like, what level of shock might you be in? What are you experiencing at the time? You know, watching it almost voyeur-like from afar on a video of a bystander is different than actually being in the moment, I'd imagine. Anybody who's responded
paralyzed with fear
totally
that if you intervene,
responding,
you might get stabbed.
So I come from a family where my mom is the person that, like, is the first one in. Like, she would charge in. She's the lab technician. She doesn't have a problem with blood. She's worked in a hospital environment. She would, like, do everything, like stop the bleeding, figure it out, got industrial first aid as a result, because she was like, I'm going to make you be one of those people. And so I've kind of always been that person, but in this temperature, I don't know that I would have rushed in.
Well, and a lot of people are asking, why didn't they do something? What would I have done? And so we want to bring in someone who has sort of an expert insight into this. Dr. Azim Shariff is a UBC Social Psychologist. Thank you so much for your time today, and we really appreciate you joining us.
Happy to.
Tell us, just from what you've seen, what you've read. I know you didn't see the actual, very dramatic and violent video either, but from what you've gleaned, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think that is the question that everybody's asking themselves. One is, what would you do? And the other is, what do you think you should have done? And these are two separate questions. I think all of us would like to think that we would be the hero who would charge in, who would stop the bleeding, who would maybe tackle the assailant. The social psychology suggests that, well, the power of the situation can be very overwhelming, that our own behaviors could be quite unpredictable. I haven't watched the video. I've seen stills of it. I've heard the commentary that people are very disappointed and distraught by the people who are just sitting there. It's hard to predict how we would have acted in that situation. Since, as a result, it's hard to completely judge other people's behavior. People tend to not find themselves in these situations very frequently, and oftentimes they freeze as a result. They don't know how to deal with it. The situation overwhelms them.
Do you think it's situational then? Somebody who may have stood still and been frozen in this particular scenario might have reacted differently if the circumstances were different of what they witnessed. If somebody had been hit by a car, or if there was a bullying scenario where they could have stepped in and said, whoa, wait a second, versus this trauma that I would imagine not a single soul there would have expected to see a stabbing at the Starbucks on a Sunday afternoon.
Well, that's exactly right. So, as you mentioned, I'm a social psychologist, and lesson number one about social psychology is to recognize the power of the situation, and that oftentimes it's a lot stronger than any dispositional aspect, any individual difference, any personality trait that somebody has. One of the things that we've known for 50 or 60 years now is the bystander effect, that the more people that are around, the less likely you are as an individual to do anything. If you're the only person there, you're more likely to act than if you're surrounded by one or two or three or 10 or 20 people, as was the case here. And the reason for that is several. So one is that there's the diffusion of responsibility. Everybody thinks, well, somebody else will do something. But two is that you use the other people's behavior as a social proof, as a cue of what you're supposed to do. So as humans, we tend to figure out how we're supposed to act by looking at how other people act. And there can be this a pluralistic ignorance where you think that, well, if somebody else is not acting, they know what the right thing to do is. And they're looking at you and thinking, well, if you're not acting, then you must know that the right thing to do is not to act. And so that can really take over crowds in these types of situations.
What about the idea that where some people have made choices, whether they're frozen in fear or what have you, the instinct to grab your camera and record this, someone being murdered essentially in front of you, versus using your phone to call 911?
Yeah, so that's the bit that's sort of a new angle, right? 50, 60 years ago when psychologists started studying that, this wasn't a problem. And I don't think the research has really caught up to that. We should commend the one person who did flag down a police officer who ended up then arresting the killer here. That is good. It is good that somebody did that. The people who habitually started filming things, it might just be that. It might be a reflexive habit that people have. They film everything. That's their go-to move in a situation where something out of the ordinary is happening. They may have also thought that they were helping by doing so. They may have thought that by documenting evidence. So it could have been a story that they told themselves. It also could have been a very safe way for them to do something in that situation. Help. There's a lot of unpredictable things that are going on. Exactly. Yeah.
So Azim, is there a right thing to do when you're faced with a situation like this, where there's something going on with people you don't know in a situation that just presents itself? Is there a right thing?
Well, I mean, I would like to hear from the police what we're expected to do in a situation where there is somebody with a knife. I don't know. So if I was in that situation, I don't know. First of all, I don't know how I would react. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, what the police recommend me to do. What I can tell you is about some of the research on what tends to happen in these types of situations. So I mentioned the bystander effect. I mentioned that people are less likely to, every individual is less likely to act. There have been analyses of videos, closed circuit camera videos, so taken not by an individual, but taken by cameras that are present, of many violent situations around the world. And in most of them, in fact, nearly all of them, 9 out of 10 situations, somebody, and usually multiple people, do something. So the difference is there that every individual is less likely to act, but since there's so many people, the odds are that somebody's going to do something. And so as a victim, you'd expect that if you're surrounded by 10 or 20 people, somebody is actually going to do something. And that tends to be the case, not just in safe places, but also in quite violent places. And so whatever the right thing is to do in these types of situations, people tend to, or groups tend to actually have a few people who do actually intervene.
Thank God for that. Well, I mean, our hearts are with that family, and honestly, it is food for thought to wonder what you would do, but we really appreciate your insights. It's a fascinating conversation, so thank you so much for joining us.
All right, you too, take care.
That's Dr. Azim Shariff, a UBC Social Psychologist.
I'd like to follow up with law enforcement to find out what is recommended that we do. I think we've changed our behavior a lot in the last number of years as we've begun to feel less safe in our own environments. There was a time where we would certainly jump in and try and help someone, and I think that might have changed a little bit in these last few years.
In the days before people were running around with knives and weapons and guns and
divisive
mental health issues and drugs and who knows. It's a whole different ball of wax. It's scary stuff. Still ahead. I mean, we're gonna talk about death still.
Right.
Because we're all gonna die someday, and a lot of us are not prepared for it, and we don't like to talk about it. And there's grief and all the sorts of issues you have to navigate. So when we come back, you are gonna meet a BC end-of-life doula. This is gonna be fascinating.
This is important.
Stay tuned for that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this one.